And suddenly I was thinking, well, how would you explain it from a materialist point of view when the brain activity is flatlined, the heart has stopped, and you are seeing from above the body? You're not seeing through your eyes or through your ears, you're seeing it from above, from a whole different perspective. I couldn't find any other explanation beyond the fact that consciousness survives bodily death and inactivity in the brain.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernard Beitman, MD. Yes, I study synchronicity, among other things. And we have a variety of guests, and a lot of questions come up as with different people. And today we have several questions that we're going to ask, and we're going to get some really cool, fun answers about how reality works from our guests today. We also say, what does the brain have to do with consciousness? What does the brain have to do with consciousness? I mean, what? I mean, as you will hear, a basic neuroscientist thinks it's just the brain creates it. And a lot of people are still trying to make it quantum someplace in the brain that'll prove that it's the brain generating it, but there's too much else going on around here. But we'll get to that. So what does the brain have to do with consciousness? How are synchronicity and consciousness related to each other? What happens when sometimes a neuroscientist deeply meditates? Well, you're going to hear about our guest today. Her worldview got shattered. She had ontological shock, and it was replaced by a much grander vision, and it's made her life a lot more fun too. So, as you will see, our guest today is somebody I've met through the Science and Medical Network. Marjorie Woollacott is a member of the Institute of Neuroscience at the University of Oregon. She's president of the Academy for the Advancement of Post-Materialistic Science, or post-materialist. That means, so science is going to recognize that consciousness is primary. That's what that group is talking about. She's on the science committee of the Institute of Noetic Sciences and research director for the International Association of Near-Death Experiences, besides mentioning her involvement in the Science and Medical Network. She received over $7 million in research funding for her research in rehabilitation medicine, meditation, spiritual awakening, and end-of-life experiences. Over 200 scientific articles, that's a lot, and written 9 books, that's 9 books, including Infinite Awareness, which received 8 book awards, and Spiritual Awakening. She got a lot of scientists to talk about their experiences with consciousness. So welcome to Connecting with Coincidence, Marjorie. I'm really glad we have a chance to talk about this stuff.
Yes, thank you, Bernie. I think it'll be a great conversation today.
And as we have done sometimes in this business, we're going to start with please tell us a coincidence story.
Sure. Yeah, so my coincidence story is from about September of 1987. And I had been a professor at the University of Oregon for about 7 years. And so in the 7th year, you get a sabbatical and you're able to go off for a year and study other things. So half of that sabbatical year, I did my usual research on stroke and Parkinson's disease and other aspects of neuroscience. And the second half, I actually offered service to my meditation teacher as she went around the world giving programs in various communities. And at the end of that sabbatical year, about a week before I was going to return home to Eugene, to the University of Oregon, she came into my office where I was working, and she sat down in her chair. And she turned to me and she said, "So, Marjorie, are you getting married?" And I thought that was an unusual question, as I had a boyfriend, but not somebody that I was really interested in marrying. And so I said to her, "No, I'm not interested in getting married because I couldn't travel with you like I did this year if I were married." And she didn't say anything more to me, and she just began talking to someone else. Now, after I returned home about a week later, I received a call from someone who'd heard about my meditation path, and he was interested in coming to a meditation program, which happened to be at my home. I had the local meditation center. And we talked on the phone for a while, and he sounded intrigued. And I should mention, he also sounded a little bit skeptical. And in fact, I told him, look, nothing to be concerned about because I'm just an ordinary university professor. There's nothing unusual about me. And so he came to the first program about a week later. And when he walked in the door and I saw him, I had the sense that I was going to marry him. Now, of course, I didn't say anything, but
Marjorie, would you tell us about that sense you had there?
yes,
Tell
I
us
mean,
about.
so the person opens, I open the door because he knocks on the door. I open the door and I see him, and there is just this sense of, oh my goodness, I'm going to marry you. I mean, it's a fascinating thing because it's not intellectual. It's something else that happens as a knowing that's beyond the intellect. And of course, the humor is that I could recognize it, but of course, you know that that's totally inappropriate to say something like that to someone you've never met before. So of course, you politely invite them in, and then, of course, what I understand too is that once you have made that knowing or had that knowing, you interact with the person very differently because suddenly the person feels very much like more known by you since you know that's the case. So I'm sure I was more flirtatious with him than I might have been with other people. And in fact, so what he said to me then, 7 weeks later, after going to 7 programs, he stayed after everyone else had left. And he said to me, I have something to confess to you. And I said, well, what? And he said, I'm incredibly attracted to you. And I burst out laughing. I don't know how that affected him in the moment, but I burst out laughing and told him it took you long enough. And of course, we were married the following summer, and we've now been married for 35 years. So I would like to know what he thought in that moment when I said it took you long enough and laughed. But I think that's certainly an amazing synchronicity for me. And when I think about the personal significance of that, why it meant so much to me, it's because I realized that it allowed me to begin a whole new phase of my life of being what I would call like lovingly yoked to somebody else that had the same primary goal in life that I did, which was to really experience a wider consciousness and to experience it in every single moment of my day. And it was also one of the first times in my life, because I was a neuroscientist, remember again, that I was aware that there was an event in which time and space weren't operating in their usual ways they do in three-dimensional reality. And so it was like a shock to me. I mean, when, in fact, I put all of that together when he walked in the door, it's like, wow, what was going on? So there you have that first awareness in my life of synchronicity. I realize now that many synchronicities probably happen in our lives before we become aware of them, and we just forget about them because we don't understand their meaning and their significance.
Did you ask him his experience?
No, I mean, I should mention that as you say, I love to tell the story and he loves to tell the story. So whenever we meet somebody new that's a meditator, he has to say, well, this is how we met. And then he tells the story. And it's simply that thing where I think, I will take it back. He does say one thing. He says, I was afraid to say anything to her because this was my chance to actually know a wider consciousness, to know reality. I was going to now learn to meditate deeply, and I didn't want to ruin it by saying something to the head of this meditation center and have her then, basically say, who are you? And never be able to continue my meditation. So he did mention there was a trepidation in him when he told me about that.
Well, his reaction was he didn't want to lose the meditation teacher.
Yes.
But yours was not, I don't want to lose my student here. This recognition of what you were the first to recognize there. So somewhere along the line, over 7 sessions, I think you mentioned,
Yeah.
he came to be able to say more than, I think you're a great meditation teacher. He reciprocated, was able to consciously be aware of reciprocating the feeling that you had for him.
Yes. And I think too that because my meditation teacher had said something a few weeks earlier back in the Catskill Mountains of New York, I think that that obviously had primed something deep in my consciousness to be aware of this when it did happen.
That's so important. prime something deep in your subconscious so that you're ready for it when it happened. When we talk about coincidences, synchronicities, our subconscious has a lot to do with them sometimes. And we
Yeah.
don't know that. I just discovered that recently with a coincidence I had with someone who I am preparing by coincidence, starting yesterday, a workshop on romantic coincidences.
Wow. Well, as
And
you say that, I should mention that one of the reasons I enjoy telling this is when I get together with other meditators, I find out that when I tell my story about myself and my husband, Paul, all these other women tell me their stories of meeting their husband. I'll just give you a very brief one that she told me. I think that woman told me on Christmas Day when we were having Christmas dinner together. And she said, well, what happened to her is that she was, I think, in her late teens, and her mother had a friend that was actually from another country, but he was over here visiting. And she had invited him to a dinner party, and he had knocked on the door. And she said to her daughter, who's named Ginny, she said, Ginny, go answer the door and let the person in. And Ginny said, no, I'm not going to answer the door. I don't want to meet a stranger. And I understand that because I'm an introvert myself, and I've done that to my mother before. And her mother says, no, you have to answer the door. She says she opens the door, and as she opens the door, she hears now a booming voice from like around her saying, this is the man you're going to marry. And she responds out loud, no, I'm not. and wonders what's going on. What's going on? And then, of course, they continue on. And she says it takes 2 years of their interacting before finally she says to him, is it time for us to get married now? And so they get married. So what is going on? Who knows? That the universe is like in that moment, like allowing you to be able to hear what's about to happen in the future, even though at that point you may not be ready for it. So
oh, that's good. That's good. And I to repeat, I'm in the beginnings of doing this preparation, and I love when this happens. So I'm talking with you now, and it's about what I'm working on right soon after we stop talking. And since this is going to be on Zoom, I'm probably going to use this as part of the presentation, just to get it going. And it's a beautiful thing. It might be the only thing we need to be able to do. Well, when you see, I call this a meta coincidence, a coincidence about a coincidence.
yeah,
And these meta coincidences are really fun. You have it, and I have one that is related, but the same thing, but about my coincidence is about your coincidence, not
yeah,
just your coincidence. You have studied the brain. Um, you studied stroke. You know that some people post-stroke get depressed, which is one of the ways I got involved with anosognosia, the not knowing, not being aware of some part of your body, but it's also not knowing your emotions, which can happen in alexithymia. So you've gotten into stuff that was really interesting, and just fun to be able to remember some of that. So you were a dedicated neuroscientist, getting lots of money for grants to in rehab for people suffering from Parkinson's and stroke. And then you meditated with Muktananda, and something happened to you. Would you please describe what happened to you, and then what the consequences, some of the consequences were immediately?
yeah. And I should mention that I had a sister, I still have my sister, who had been meditating for a number of years. This was back again in 1976. And she was in the Catskill Mountains with Swami Muktananda and had been meditating for maybe a year or two. And it was my birthday, and I was actually teaching at a university in Virginia. And she said, Marjorie, she said, for your birthday, it would be wonderful to be able to see you. So I'm going to invite you to come up to the Catskill Mountains and take this meditation retreat called a meditation intensive retreat with me. And I'll treat you to it. And of course, I was skeptical. My boyfriend called my sister a bubblehead because she meditated and she did those things that were not, scientific with your blinders on. And so she reminds me that I said yes, then I said no, and then I said yes again. And she then had to find a place in this now full retreat she did. So what happened on that first morning of the retreat is that we were told that the Swami was going to walk around and initiate every individual there. And the initiation was going to happen through the Swami's touch. Now, the scientist in me was skeptical, but I also realized, look, I'm here for the weekend. I'll just put my skepticism aside right now because really I'm also curious to actually see what might happen. And so as he was walking around the room, my eyes were closed, but my senses were otherwise fully engaged, so that when he came to me and I felt his touch right between my eyes on the bridge of my nose, I had the sense of utter certainty about what happened. And that was that it felt like a mini lightning bolt, like a current of electricity went from his fingers right between my eyes down into my being, right to the center of my chest. And I could feel the exact point where it stopped. And it was my heart. Again, not the physical heart that I knew about as a neuroscientist, but more than a physical heart had ever felt like to me. And it was like this feeling of this love now pouring out from that heart and going like through my entire being and beyond. And the words that came to my mind had nothing to do with scientific analysis. They were, I'm home. I'm home. My heart is my home. And that was interesting in that the very next day when I went back to my university position in Virginia, I got up spontaneously and I got up to meditate. And I did that day after day after day. It's like my world of my behaviors had turned around 180 degrees. And now I knew that if I simply got up to meditate and quieted my mind, there was something that I could tap into just below the surface of my awareness. It was just waiting for me to experience this beautiful sense of quiet contentment and joy. And of course, then the consequence was that I'm now beginning to think, well, what is consciousness? As a neuroscientist, I thought it was purely created by the activity of the neurons in my brain. And now I've had an experience where consciousness seems much more than that. And it seems to like basically encompass my entire body and beyond. It seems like it is in many ways infinite. And I'm thinking, how do I actually pull together these two worldviews that are now sitting to me together in my mind? And I should say it took me about 20 years to finally say, wait a minute, I have to integrate these things. And I should also mention it was partly because, again, my sweet husband now, who I had met and married, loved things like consciousness, and he loved things like homeopathy and Reiki, energy medicine. And he would start to talk about these with my scientific colleagues at a dinner party. And he would only get like a kick under the table from me as I would try to help him change the subject, because then I basically could lose my entire credibility with my scientific colleagues by talking about these things that they had no experience of and they couldn't really believe were real. So that then got me to finally, after about 20, 25 years, start to do research in my own laboratory on meditation. So that's then led me to now saying, finally, I can begin to do research to try to understand what's really going on when one has these spiritual awakenings.
Well, as we listen to your story and the many details in it, the most profound part of it was Muktananda's touch.
Yeah.
There's a lot that got you to that moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot that, and that's all this coincidence stories are all very much a lot of detail about what was happening until I got to this place.
Yeah.
But at that place, you were literally and emotionally and consciously touched. You were initiated.
Yeah.
And you got your Kundalini activated, at least from your third eye to, I mean, your seventh eye.
Yeah.
Seventh is this seven?
Six is between the seventh is this top. Yeah.
Sixth.
Yeah.
I won't tell you my success story, but the sixth to your fourth, I guess, the heart. And the Kundalini, why don't you explain Kundalini a little bit for people who don't understand it, and describe the experience once again, so we have some idea of that.
Right. Yes, I think it's interesting because, of course, in Western medicine, we don't really talk about the Kundalini, but in almost all of the spiritual traditions from around the world, it's talked about in one form or another. In other traditions, it might be called the chi or the ki, et cetera, but it's that same energy that they say lies dormant in a human being when we are first born. And they say typically it lies dormant at the base of the spine in a coiled form, and that's why they call it Kundalini, which means coiled. And then when one has a spiritual awakening, and of course it can happen spontaneously, it can happen, for example, in the middle of the night while you're sleeping or during a dream or during spiritual practices like my own, and in my case, initiated by a master of meditation. What happens is that energy now is awakened, and you literally begin to feel it in the various centers of your body, like the heart center, the center between your eyes, the 7 centers all the way up to the top of your head. And it also begins moving then along this axis that interpenetrates the spinal column. And so you feel this energy moving in your body. And also in special places, it seems to like really manifest, in my case, like this feeling of love and ecstasy. And I should say that ever since that first initiation and that awakening, when I meditate, I tend to feel a feeling of joy, of vibration, of total like deep contentment in my heart, between my eyes, at the top of my head. And I didn't know about the Kundalini beforehand. I was a neuroscientist that had never heard of such a thing. And so it's intriguing to me that people throughout all the cultures of the world learn about it, usually from an experience like that. And then they say, wait a minute, I have to begin to understand this. And then they read these books and it's like, oh my goodness, this is what people for 2000 plus years have experienced themselves inside.
Yes, and thank you for that. And your heart opened, and you use the word ecstasy, and I know we have to be careful about it, but I was touched during a holotropic breathing experience, and I felt ecstasy in a way that is best to call, I can be called divine love, and those are all kinds of words for that, but we have channels to divine love that you got opened and then finally began to study, but you were open to it, and you had a spouse, a partner who was open to this, which really is very, very important in all this. When people have somebody who's not into it and they're married to them, it's a different situation. So you've had that. So after 20 years or so, you finally came out of the closet and began doing research in meditation. And let's try to talk about what you've learned about what consciousness is.
Mhm.
How do you think about that now?
Well, I'll first take just this one step back to say that the way I began doing it, of course, was first doing research in my laboratory on people who meditated and found out that their attentional abilities were so much better than people who didn't meditate, their ability to focus, et cetera. And that was intriguing. Also, their equanimity. They didn't react so quickly to things. They were able to press what we call the pause button and then respond instead of react. And so I was intrigued by that. And so I said, how can I learn more about consciousness? So I decided about 4 years before I retired that I was going to write a book. And the book was going to be a way for me to put together all the research that was out there on consciousness so that I could understand what is the research that might say that it is truly fundamental, like my experience implied. And so the first research that I began looking at was near-death experiences that are found, of course, throughout the ages in many cultures. And as you know, Bruce Grayson at the University of Virginia and others, Pim van Lommel in the Netherlands, et cetera, have done a lot of very careful prospective studies. And by prospective studies, I mean studies that they bring in everybody to a hospital network from one particular point in time through the end of the study. It might be 2 or 3 years later. And every single person that has cardiac arrest then is interviewed, their blood oxygen is analyzed, et cetera, so that they really know what happened when they had cardiac arrest and they lost consciousness and their EEG flatlined, and then what they experienced during the time. And what happened is, when I began reading that literature, and I should mention, as a materialist neuroscientist, I never looked at the literature because I knew it couldn't be true. Suddenly, when you have the awakening, it's like, oh, let me look under PubMed, the United States Medical Index on Research, and type in near-death experiences, and up come all of these articles. It's like, oh my goodness, I was blind because my attention was focused elsewhere. It still existed. And so when I looked at these studies, I had no way of actually thinking that there could be another reason for these experiences to occur. Because again, just an example, the person has cardiac arrest, and this happened to a friend of mine, and I have the story in my book. Her name is Bettina Payton. She was also an MD. It happened during the cesarean section birth of her third child. She ended up having cardiac arrest, and she left her body, and she watched the entire resuscitation from above her body. And she mentions that she actually saw a particular physician come into the room, weave his way through all the people that were trying to work on her to get the cardiac, the heart going again. And he reached inside her blood-filled abdomen because they were doing a C-section, and he found the aorta. He clamped it shut. And she said, when he clamped it shut, she suddenly felt the energy in her body begin to pulse again, like she felt what we would call in spiritual terms, the prana, the energy. So the life force was now flowing again through her body. And she then also heard a nurse whisper in her ear, "You have a little baby girl, she's fine." She said she then lost consciousness again till she came to in the recovery room. And she said she was surrounded by the team of doctors and her husband, who was also a doctor, and she had a trachea tube in her throat. And she motioned to them, because she couldn't speak, to not say anything and to give her a pen. And she then wrote on a napkin words to this effect: "I know I had cardiac arrest. I know my uterus is out because they did a hysterectomy, and I know I have a baby girl," because she wanted them to know that she knew. And she said at that moment, she knew consciousness was fundamental, and she knew that there was no question, and it never changed afterwards. So that's one case example, but Bruce Grayson and others have given many, many, many. And suddenly I was thinking, well, how would you explain it from a materialist point of view when the brain activity is flatlined, the heart has stopped, and you are seeing from above the body? You're not seeing through your eyes or through your ears. You're seeing it from above, from a whole different perspective. I couldn't find any other explanation beyond the fact that consciousness survives bodily death and inactivity in the brain.
Beautifully said, Marjorie. Beautifully said. Thank you very much. And now, just there's so much more. But let's go back a bit. We went to Kundalini and near-death experiences. Let's go back to your meditation teacher telling you, "Are you getting married?" Or saying that to you, and then that feeling you had when you saw this guy walk into your meditation session.
Yeah.
That the synchronicity includes the meditation teacher priming you so your subconscious was ready, and then he's there and you can put the two together, and we can call that a synchronicity. And how does that go together with, how does experiences like that, synchronicity and consciousness, how are they linked?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. What's been wonderful about being able now to really do research in this area is that I've begun to look at research by a number of people. Stefan Schwartz is one of them. Bernardo Kastrup is another, where they really talk about, from our point of view of now knowing that consciousness is fundamental, how do we view the universe? And so here are some of the things that I am now understanding that make a lot more sense than my materialist point of view. And that is that, first of all, consciousness is causal. And in other words, what that means is physical reality is its manifestation. So consciousness comes first, and then it itself is intelligent, it is creative, it has total freedom, and it creates the physical universe out of its own joy of knowing itself. And then because of that, we are all part of this consciousness as mental, physical entities in the universe, mind-body complexes. We are all linked or entangled. And again, I think that Bernardo Kastrup gives this beautiful example, along with Ed Kelly at the University of Virginia, of, he talks about dissociative identity disorder, which I love, which is the equivalent of what we might call schizophrenia, where you have multiple personalities within one body. And he said he loves that analogy because it's a little bit like universal consciousness deciding to become many individual consciousnesses, all the human beings and the animals, et cetera, of the world. And it gets dissociative identity disorder when we each identify with our own little mind-body complex. And therefore, we think we're separate from all the other mind-body consciousness, but we're not. And that the whole spiritual journey is about making a new recognition of who we really are, that we're all connected, that in fact, we're entangled or linked. And of course, in our synchronicities, we have example after example of that entanglement or that linking. And I think the other point too is that we see that aspects of consciousness are really able to exist beyond the time-space continuum, which again, a materialist might not agree with, but people understanding consciousness being fundamental say this is essential. So again, when my meditation teacher said to me, Marjorie, are you getting married? She was tapping in beyond that dissociative boundary, we might call it, to this place beyond time and space. And she could, in some level of her consciousness, see something that she was then asking me about to see if I might be aware of that, or if, as I was aware in the future when that actually came to be. So I think those are important. The other thing, last one, is that really consciousness exists throughout the universe and throughout the body. So everything in the universe is consciousness. And there is a consciousness that I might call the potential consciousness of infinite awareness that is beyond the physical universe. And those two are obviously very important. And in meditation, I believe what happens is that, and here I bring in the neuroscience, is that the filters on our brain that we all have that are important for being able to function in physical reality. If all the information coming in from the atmosphere were able to really be perceived, it would be way too much for us. So we have filters in our brain. Examples are the 5 sensory receptors. They're filtering out sensory information. There's something called the default mode network, which is in the cortex, which is a way of keeping us from having too much information. And also it's one that creates narratives about who we are to help us relate to the world. When those are turned off, in a near-death experience, in deep meditation, we now find in psilocybin experiences, what happens is that our awareness is expanded because those filters are now gone, or at least greatly reduced. And now we have that dissociative boundary, that we might call it, open so that we can hear, experience, feel at some deep level truths coming in from this entangled universe that we're a part of.
The synchronicity of your meditation teacher, you explained by going to a place beyond time and space to be able to sense something about what was going to happen to you.
Yes.
And we can argue about that. I have a little different opinion about it, but the ability to see the future is something that we have, and we have to get caught up in what is linear time versus right now time. These are all questions. It's more having experiences like this that bring you to question the reality that we are in, so that your meditation teacher saw the future in some way and made you wonder, and you have your answers to how that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had this intuitive knowing when he walked in, and that intuitive knowing, that intuition of, yes, this is the one for me.
Mm-hmm.
That is something having to do with you, whatever you define you to be.
Yep.
Who is the you that experienced that he is the one for me?
Isn't that an interesting question? I think that when you say that, because I believe, again, that there is, how do I want to phrase it? It's like I don't think that my intellect was even involved in that. So first of all, that's the point. It's something else. And so it's not the intellect that's me. It's not the normal conscious awareness that's me. It's something else that's very, very deep. And one might say it's our spirit, our soul, if one wants to use those terms. But again, the materialist would say, excuse me, what does that mean? But I think that some deeper part of myself that reminds me of that idea of being beyond, excuse me, this dissociative boundary, something in me knows at a very, very deep level about, in fact, what my future may hold. And it recognizes that. And of course, then has those words come into my mind that, this is going to be my future husband. Yeah.
Well, one of the big problems that you had to face, and I certainly did, is what's the relationship between mind and brain,
Yes.
mind and body. And that tends to get ignored in a lot of discussions from what I can see. I'm a psychiatrist. I think psychiatry is a mind-brain profession
Mhm.
because we give pills and they change the mind, and we do psychotherapy and it changed the brain. So there's some kind of interaction between the two. So my question still for you is that you registered that information. It was out there. Your meditation teacher knew it. You were able to not only know it, but identify the person to whom that applied. So there was something in what we call you to receive it. There was a receptor. We won't have to call it eyes. We use the word intuition to cover a lot of different stuff.
Mhm.
You had an intuitive knowing when you really knew, and I've had that sometimes too. I just know this about this person, and it's overwhelmingly wonderful to have that feeling. And then to have to wait until maybe is it going to happen or isn't it going to happen? But it starts with it happened to you. And
Mhm.
what I'm asking is the universe, as you're saying it, the entangled, the intelligent, the joyful, the playful, and those are wonderful ideas out there, somehow touched you almost the way Muktananda did.
Mhm.
And that was his finger on your skull.
Yeah.
I mean, we can call that a physical event, but it was obviously more than that. So as a neuroscientist, I'm really asking you, how did you register that information?
Well, I think here's the reason why it's complex. That is that I just told you about near-death experiences where the brain is no longer functioning, but the person has these experiences without a functioning brain and without a heart beating. And in fact, in the case of many of the people that have had near-death experiences, and another one is an MD, her name is Mary, she actually had the knowing during the NDE when her brain was flatlined and she was out, that her son, who was young at that time, was going to die before he was like, I think, 18 years of age. Now, that was incredibly frightening to her because this was a beloved son, one of her children. And she had to deal with that. And she was very happy when I think he got to be 18. And I think she hadn't told him yet, but she told him at the age of 18 because he wasn't dead yet. And he just brushed it off and said, "Oh, Mom." And he died, I think, a few months later. He was out, I think, skateboarding on a road in New England, and a child who wasn't paying any attention actually killed him from running into him in his car. So there you have somebody whose brain was flatlined and had a premonition about something in the future, which came true. How do we explain it? I mean, I don't think there's any easy way to explain it because consciousness can exist and be aware without the body functioning. And when it is functioning, then we register, as you say, through somewhere in our brain and are able to experience it. And it's like, here's that paradox. It's like, what on earth is going on?
I am not at all questioning our ability to know things when our brain is flatlined or even when we're in major life transitions or stressors. That's when synchronicity is more likely to become conscious if people ever see them. So there are stressful circumstances. That's a huge one when you can experience synchronicities. You touched on the question that I don't get to ask very much because you're a neuroscientist.
Yeah.
Even with the near-death experience, the woman who wrote on the napkin, she still was able to take the information from consciousness and register it somewhere, and I would say her brain, because then her brain wrote that out.
After it was awake again, yeah. And
After it
yet
was
when she wasn't awake, she was perceiving it. So I think we don't know the answer. I mean, when you ask about an answer, I think when you talk to any neuroscientist about this, some people can say, well, maybe it's in the dendrites of the brain, or they want to put it, that place of transition into some place in the brain. But it's like, does that really solve the problem or answer the question, I don't know. I'm intrigued by the ways we want to do that. Obviously, Penrose has talked about the microtubules being maybe a place where quantum changes are going on. I wonder, even if at some point we're able to find something like that that's happening, whether that will really answer our question for us or not.
Well, I don't think it's the right right place to look. That in dendrites, for example, or in microtubules,
Yeah,
I think it's a need to recognize what I think is that our bodies are also forms of energy, energy,
absolutely.
energy and information. These are condensations of consciousness
Yeah.
into this level. It's like liquid, gas, and solid. This is we're a solid, relatively solid form of higher energy that could be called liquid in some form or gas in some form. And that is, to me, the way it works. What do you think of that that analogy?
I mean, I like it, and here's why I like it. I've gotten a second degree after my PhD, a master's degree in Asian studies, studying ancient texts from Kashmir. And one of these ancient texts is from what they call the recognition philosophy of Kashmir from the 10th century. And in that philosophy, they talk about ultimate consciousness, infinite and playful, and wanting to know itself, deciding, I want to know myself. So it basically crystallizes itself energetically into coarser and coarser and coarser forms until you actually have then the mind-body complex of all the animals, et cetera. And the point is that in doing that, consciousness comes into every single aspect of the mind and the body of everything. And your goal as a meditator, if that is your goal, is to, first of all, see if you can bring your awareness back to that infinite, what we would call place beyond the dissociative boundary, so you feel the oneness, but then you need to reintegrate it into your ordinary awareness in your day-to-day life so that you are like able to maybe experience both at the same time, my embodied state and this higher state in some form of awareness. Now, is it happening in every cell of my body? I don't know. How does the brain help with this? I don't know the answer to that. I wish I did, but I love that idea about this gradual continuum of levels of infinite awareness down to the increasing material complexity or vibrational complexity would be a better term of all of material reality. And again,
Yeah,
material reality is just vibrations.
yeah, it's just vibration, just frequency, and I've experienced that directly with certain mind-altering substances. 5-MeO, 5 DMT variant is. I just saw that recently. The whole thing is that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say we agree that that's a likely way of thinking about the mind brain. They're really not separate. They're different forms of energy and different frequencies. Um, when you go from a solid to a gas or solid to a liquid, you have to heat up the solid or put energy into it. And same from going from a liquid to a gas, you have to put energy into the liquid. There's a energy required to go through the transition from one state to another.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what you think about the possibility that there are these transitional states that require some kind of energy input or extraction in order for the transitions to take place.
I think it's very likely. I mean, here's an example that I'm just playing with right now because I'm working on research with Daniel Ingram and colleagues of his who are, in fact, part of the EPRC, the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium, in which they're trying to look at meditative awakenings from a medical point of view to demystify the way that physicians seem to say this is pathology. They're trying to make it neutral. And he is working, of course, also, he happens to be a Buddhist by background, and he is looking at those concentrative states where you actually meditate for many hours of the day. And what you're doing is you're putting concentrative energy into your meditation and making yourself more and more and more concentrated, going deeper and deeper inside. And that's when you have these breakthroughs, which sometimes are almost like explosions after that incredible energy that you're putting in. So I think that is absolutely critical, especially the fact that often it's described as a state change, that you go from being in the body to suddenly pushing yourself out of the body, or an explosion that you hear, and then you see something behind you. So definitely there is that energetic component. And I think it's interesting that the more we put our energy into that practice, the more we have a chance of moving to those higher levels.
I'm so glad you said state change.
Yes, there it is. It's the same thing as water to gas or whatever. Yes.
Yeah, it's a state change. And now you're describing how meditation puts energy into the possibility, so it would take less energy to transition. Escape velocity is a nice other metaphor. So you can escape, if you want, call it that, or at least move to a different level of consciousness more easily when you meditate.
Right. Yes, I mean, to me, that is an interesting thing that I am learning slowly but surely, because obviously I'm a practitioner and a scientist. And so when I go into my meditation laboratory, so to speak, in the morning, I try these things like having this incredibly intense internal focus on whether it's the breath, the mantra, whatever. These cases of that a kasina retreat, they actually call it, that the Buddhists use, it's on a light in front of you like a candle. And you have one pointed focus on that candle for like 8 hours of the day, except when you're you can walk around, but you're always doing that. And it's that extreme energy that, as you say, allows that state change. So intention, resolution, those things are critical for meditative shifts in state to get across that dissociative boundary.
Well, what do you think? We're getting near the end of today. This has really been fascinating for you to confirm what I have been writing about and imagining, and talking with this friend of mine about, who moves from solid liquid to gas in his meditations. I mean, he's using that metaphor quite regularly. And that we're able to talk about putting in energy for the transition, and or take energy out. I mean, for you when you come back down again. So as we come to the end of this wonderful conversation, Marjorie, what does what we have just talked about the relationship between the physical body and consciousness and this transitional energy thing, what does that lead you to be thinking about?
Well, I think, first of all, it reminds me that the more I can allow myself to let go of those filters, and now when I say filters, I'm talking about the narrative stories that keep my mind occupied all day long and keep me from being in the present moment in a quiet, aware state. The more I can let go of those, the more I have the opportunity, first of all, to experience and be aware of synchronicities, because they are happening around us all the time, because we are interconnected with other entities in the universe, and we can be part of a dance of creating things that are happening in the universe. And secondly, I think that it allows us as well to actually create the dance ourselves joyfully with other people. And I think, to me, that's my main understanding about what I want in my own life right now, is to joyfully co-create wonderful things in the universe with infinite awareness, being able to see beyond the dissociative boundaries and act in ways that can uplift myself and others, and let go of always the focus that the narrative mind has on difference, that this is good, this is bad. It's like that polarity of the opposites that our mind-body complex, when it's in its narrative mode, actually experiences, and to find ways of lowering the filtering mechanisms so that we see our interconnection. And I think then I find that I'm a lot more satisfied with the world and myself, and can enjoy the dance, whatever the dance is.
That dance is what I'm after, and had that in a meeting with some people talking about looking for patterns and coincidence stories. But I was able to evoke that in a group for 5 minutes, for 30 of 5 for about 30 seconds. Could feel the energy being shared among and between us, and it was a great feeling. So as we end this, the aim, and I like to be intentional, and you do too. I mean, you research, you got to have some idea in mind about where you're going. It helps, even if you get deviated to something else. To be able to find ways, and I think synchronicity is one of them, to be able to do that dance together, to share the energy which we all are in our physical bodies, but still be sharing the energy that links us, that of which we are all a part. So we're linked and we're part. So the linking leads to the feeling of being a greater part. And the world needs experiences like this. And I'm so glad to know you're doing this, because this is what I have in mind. This is what my intention is what the dance you just described, and find ways to continue to be able to do that. I had a wonderful conversation with Daniel Ingram. He came by the house. We talked for 4 or 5 hours. I know the group. They're doing good things. I'm a conceptualizer, and I can just see it, and you described it, and in so many wonderful ways. So thank you very much for being with me today. And was there some concluding comment you'd like to make for our audience?
Well, I think for everyone, it's a matter of curiosity. I think what you and I have discovered is that the more curious we are about these things and then put our energy into them, the more we actually find out. And I should say, just related to Daniel Ingram, I'm actually right now working on a paper related to one of these fire casino retreats that he actually leads, so that I can show these amazing things that happen in the retreat when we bring our energy and focus it like that, and can, as you say, get state changes into higher states of consciousness. And that's my play, where, as I say, I'm playing in the sandbox with other researchers to say, wow, what's happening, and how can we actually make it happen more consistently within ourselves and with those around us?
Thank you, Marjorie.
Thank you.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.